What is up everyone, this is Justice, and today we're going to do round 2 of Shedletsky's Sword Fights in the Heights 4, the original version versus Nostalgia Zone's Sword Fights in the Heights 4. Nostalgia Zone is the second most popular version of Sword Fights. It's an emulation of 2008, and I've already done the first episode. If you guys haven't seen that, it'll be linked in the description. Let's get into it. So the first difference I'm going to talk about is the fact that the Touchstone has a different cooldown on both games. On Shedletsky's version, the cooldown is like 1 second. On Nostalgia Zone's version, which again is an emulation of 2008, the cooldown is more like 11 seconds. And so this has gotten me killed. In fact, it's killed me more than I've been killed by other players. But yeah, I carry around 2 touchstones now to try and mitigate that. On the normal Sword Fights in the Heights, the Touchstone also has some particle effects that happen. Nostalgia Zone doesn't have those particle effects, so you can trick people by pretending like you're touchstoning when you're really going Shadow Sphere. So the second thing that is different from Nostalgia Zone and the modern Sword Fights is the fact that there's a shop on the modern Sword Fights. So if you guys know, you can buy swords and you'll immediately have those swords and you'll always have them in your inventory. You don't have to go collect them on Shedletsky's version. Now this was added back in 2016. If you remember, I actually recorded not even 2 minutes after the update came. So May 5th, 2016 is when Sword Fights entered the new Dark Ages. There is a in-game shop. On Nostalgia Zone, there is a shop, but it's more like a shop where you can buy clothing for your avatar. There's no way to become stronger on the game because of the shop, so there's a difference between the two games. The third difference between both sword fighting games is the fact that the modern Sword Fights in the Heights 4 has shift lock, you know, where you can strafe and whatever. Nostalgia Zone doesn't give you that feature because it wasn't in the game in 2008. It was introduced in 2011, I think like mid-2011. And you know, this is something that there's been an age-long debate about, whether it's better to use third person when sword fighting or shift locking. It all comes down to what you're more comfortable with and what you're better with. The only thing that Nostalgia Zone has that resembles shift lock is going in first person, but that just really leaves you vulnerable. So the next difference between the two games is one that I don't think a lot of people think about, but if you play between the two games and you play them both often, you'll think about it. It's the fact that the mouse sensitivity is lower on Nostalgia Zone. So Nostalgia Zone, I don't know if it's got like a built-in mouse sensitivity, it's lower than the modern Sword Fights by Shedletsky. On the modern Sword Fights, the mouse sensitivity is a lot higher than on Nostalgia Zone. Not entirely sure what that's about, but yeah. So the fifth difference between the two games is a major one, and that is the streaks you can get on either game. You can get a way higher streak on the modern Sword Fights in a shorter amount of time than you can get on Nostalgia Zone. And this is because of, obviously, the dual Illumina flying. The dual Illumina flying allows you to navigate the map 20 times, even probably more than that, faster than on Nostalgia Zone, because Nostalgia Zone doesn't have something like that. It's old school. This is a big difference because the amount of time it would take you to get a 300-0 streak on the modern Sword Fights would probably equal the amount of time it takes you to get like a 70-0 streak on Nostalgia Zone. Not to mention the exploiters. It's really hard to tell if someone's streak is legitimate or not on the modern Sword Fights due to the amount of exploiters. There's so many differences I could list here. I will have a video in the future coming out where I discuss this further. So the next big difference between the two games is the strongest sword, which is the Ghostwalker level 9. Just the Ghostwalker in general is different. On the modern Sword Fights nowadays, after the 2020 update, level 9 Ghostwalker makes your entire person, including sword and hat, invisible. It also has an increased damage of 6 for the slash, 12 for the lunge, and for level 9 Ghostwalker, 5 for the slash and 10 for the lunge. The Ghostwalker, when you slash your sword on the modern, it makes you pause in place from that bug we talked about earlier. And on Nostalgia Zone, that doesn't happen, so it's actually a lot easier to kill people on Nostalgia Zone with the Ghost Walker that has less damage. But again, on Nostalgia Zone, your sword and hat are not invisible. So the next difference between the two games is the lunging in air. On the modern sword fights, ever since the 2016 physics update that broke the swords, back then whenever you would lunge your sword, even on the ground, you would pause. So Shedletsky fixed this in 2020, but it still happens when you are in air. During those 4 years between 2016 and 2020, Shedletsky had only fixed the shop swords, so basically it was pay to win. You would have really overpowered swords by buying them. That's why I quit sword fights in 2016. And that's another reason why a lot of old streakers quit as well. On Nostalgia Zone, this is not an issue, so yeah, it's always a great feeling being able to slash in midair without pausing in place. It also makes using the Ghost Walker a lot more fun. The next difference between the two games is the fact that the modern sword fights is really fast-paced because of the Illumina flyers. Basically, you've got to zoom out a lot more because people could be dropping on you at any given time. You can navigate the map like 20 times faster than on Nostalgia Zone, where you can't do the Illumina flying. So that makes the modern more fast-paced, but I actually would argue that both games are kind of on par with each other, because on Nostalgia Zone, the server can get up to 30 players. And whenever it's even above 20 and the server is still not full, it's only 2/3 full, it's very fast-paced because there's people everywhere. So I think that both games are unique in their own way, but I still think that Nostalgia Zone wins out at the end of the day because it can be both slow-paced, and then later on in the day or later on in 10 minutes it could be fast-paced and then go back to slow-paced, and on the modern sword fights there's no going back. The next difference between the two games is the fact that the graphics are updated and modernized on Shedletsky's version, and on Nostalgia Zone they're old school. So you've got the round studs, you've got the old lighting, at least what's left of it. There's really no difference in materials since Nostalgia Zone is an emulation of 2008 and wood and slate were introduced in 2009. It makes sense why there isn't any on Nostalgia Zone. But what Nostalgia Zone does have is a lot of different settings for graphics, so you can turn on the character bevels, you can toggle them, you can toggle the classic sky, you can toggle the 30 FPS camera, the follower camera, reduced particles, retro explosions, or the new explosions, stencil shadows, and most importantly, the secret turbo graphics from 2006, which really is a thing. And it's really cool that Nostalgia Zone has those built-in shaders, which, I mean, they're not the best, but they're not the worst. So if you ever wanted to play with shaders, there you go. There is obviously ways nowadays, and there have been for years, to use shaders on any game on Roblox, but the fact that Nostalgia Zone has them built in makes it just better. Another difference between the two games is that on Nostalgia Zone you can play the game solo. So if you ever want to jump into the game and try out some different techniques, try out anything, or try out different swords, different items, you can do that without people bugging you. On the modern sword fights you can't. While you can go to the models and find a Sword Fights in the Heights 4 map, I don't think that unless you're exploiting, there's not really a way to copy the modern sword fights and have everything that the modern one does on a solo game. So the next difference between the two games is the sound effects. Nostalgia Zone has the old sound effects and the modern sword fights has new sound effects, and I'll play those all for you guys right now. The 12th difference between the two games is the fact that you can choose between multiple servers depending on how many people are playing the modern sword fights. On Nostalgia Zone, you cannot do that. You click play and just hope that you get into a good server. Now, there's really rarely ever more than one server on Nostalgia Zone because the server size is 30, so you can't really choose to join up on a server. And on Nostalgia Zone, that's both a good and a bad thing, because if there's an exploiter in your server, you gotta wait for them to get bored of it because there's no other servers. But it's also a good thing because that means you'll constantly have people in the server, or you'll have people joining up on your server. This makes streaking a lot easier when everyone rage quits. The only thing that the modern sword fights really does better is the fact that it lets you choose the server. So that does it for the second episode in the Sword Fights in the Heights 4, the modern version versus the old school version on Nostalgia Zone. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section if you'd like to. Consider liking the video if you enjoyed. I've been uploading my stuff early on Patreon. I work for a living, so it really helps me make videos, guys. I really appreciate you watching. Stay safe. Episode 3 will be out in the near future.